I'm often asked what advice I would give to young people who are just starting in this best of all possible worlds. If you love what you do and you really, really want to do it, then embrace it with all your heart. Because some great good fortune is going to pass under your nose when you least expect it. Hello, I'm Julie Andrews, and this is a timeline of my career. My career began at quite a young age, really. My school closed because of the war, World War II, and my mother and my stepfather, for some crazy reason, decided to give me some singing lessons. My stepdad was in vaudeville, and my mother was a pianist, and she played the piano for him, and they had an act toured all over England. To their surprise, they found out that I had a kind of freaky adult larynx and could sing all kinds of coloratura songs, and it wasn't long before I became part of their act. At the age of about 10, I began climbing on a box to sing beside them on stage, and then at 12 I had my first sort of main break in London, and that night was very successful for me because I don't think the press had ever heard such a freaky 4-octave voice in such a young kid before, but it was the beginning of all the rest, really. I was in a London production of A Cinderella. Also playing at the same time in London was a very popular show called The Boyfriend. And some American producers came over to London, and a great friend of mine said, "Why don't you look at the girl in Cinderella?" So they came to see the show, came backstage and met and asked if I'd like to go to Broadway in America, which was one of the great pieces of serendipity in my life, because after I had been in The Boyfriend for a year, I was asked by Lerner and Loewe, who wrote the wondrous play My Fair Lady, if I would be interested in playing Eliza Doolittle. Then I guess my career took off from there.
All I want is a room somewhere far away from the cold night air, with one enormous chair. Wouldn't it be lovely?
I had a lot of challenges in terms of creating Eliza. First of all, I really didn't have a Cockney accent. I didn't know how to find it, and I'd never really done a play before. I'd done my act in variety and vaudeville and music hall, but never a really long, wonderful play. And so I was completely out of my depth. And then it was just a question, really, of putting my head down and learning day after day after day my craft. It really was the greatest learning experience on stage that I could ever have had. I was in the show for about 3.5 years, and that's a very long time to play 8 performances a week. It does teach somebody how to, I mean, if your leading man has a cold, if the audience is coughing and sneezing, if it's raining outside, any number of things could happen. And you really learn how to preserve your voice, how to deliver lines, how to play comedy. I mean, it was a tremendous experience for me.
Someone's head resting on my knee, warm and tender as he can be.
Very well, hold this for me. As I expected, Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way.
When I was fortunate enough to be asked to make the film of Mary Poppins, again, it was a brand new thing in my life that I'd never done before. It was for Walt Disney, of course, and the songs in Mary Poppins had a kind of vaudeville quality to them. And I think it's what attracted me to the role, because all that kind of supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and jolly holiday music was very much like the kind of things that you hear in English vaudeville. I felt a little bit more at home with the music. I always did, because basically all my life I've been a singer, really. And so with the kindness of people like the Disney team, little by little by little, I learned the craft of making a film. The wonder of that all was that Mr. Disney not only asked me to do the film, but he asked my then husband, Tony Walton, to design Cherry Tree Lane and all the interiors of all the homes in the movie, plus the costumes for everybody. Tony was hugely talented, and creating my costumes, he would discuss them with me, and he said, you know, you're very prim and proper on the outside, but I think Mary Poppins has a kind of secret life maybe, and I'm going to give her, when you open your coat or when you turn and dance, you'll see marvelously colored petticoats and wonderful linings of your clothes. And he said, because I think that's what gives her pleasure. Very formal on the outside and a little bit wicked on the inside, so to speak. And it completely gave me a clue as to her character. Big, big help for me. Everybody knows that The Sound of Music was based on the Broadway musical. When it came time to do the movie, I think most of us felt that the piece could be quite saccharine if we were not careful. I know our director, Robert Wise, felt that way. I know that wonderful Christopher Plummer felt that way, and I certainly did also. So there were some conversations before we began filming how best to get rid of the really sugary parts of the film. It's mostly because with that beautiful scenery and 7 children and that glorious music, if you weren't careful, it could be very, very sugary. It was really thanks to Chris Plummer who gave the film its glue. He was the firm, stern father of the children and the antagonist that I had to work with. Chris was such a wonderful actor. We became great friends, and really until he passed away fairly recently, we saw each other a lot, we knew each other. He stayed a friend, and it was very pleasant.
You sing, you begin with do, re, mi. Do, re, mi. Do, re, mi.
I have you. You're home.
Oh, thank you.
I was very proud to make a wonderful film called Hawaii, and that was directed by a wonderful director called George Roy Hill. And in very short order, he was asked to direct a film called Thoroughly Modern Millie, which was a 20s flapper comedy full of sweetness. I had a ball making that film. First of all, the costumes were delicious, and it was with wonderful Mary Tyler Moore. My friendship with Mary was such that long after we'd finished the film, I was called Millie and she was called Miss Dorothy. And so I would meet her long after the film was over. We'd see each other across a grocery shop or something like that, and I'd go, "Hey, Miss Dorothy, Millie!" And we'd rush to meet and catch up on news. It was a very nice relationship. We really bonded.
You have nice eyes.
You should catch them by candlelight. Have dinner with me.
Oh, baby, won't you play me the jazz hot? Maybe, and don't ever let it end.
My first husband and I had sadly divorced, and it was painful, as they always are. But eventually I met Blake. He was very charismatic, very attractive man, and a fabulous film director. We did 7 films together, and probably one of the most important ones was Victor Victoria. And he came home one day having seen a German film called Victor und Victoria, and it was the basic theme of the film that we subsequently made. but it didn't have any of the depth of story. It didn't have the love story in it. It didn't have the homosexuality in it. It was just a early 1930s black and white movie. And Blake began to think about it, and he said to me, and there's a wonderful role for you. And I kept thinking, I don't think anybody's going to believe that I could be a guy. And I asked him about it, and he said, Julie, don't worry about it. I've built it into the film. The audience within the film believes wholeheartedly that you're a guy, and therefore the audience watching the movie in the cinema will go along with that story. It was fascinating to play that role. It stood me on my head. Was I a woman becoming a man, or was I a woman playing a man but thinking like a woman, or was I trying to be a man only but then got stuck with thinking like a woman? It was crazy. It was like patting your stomach and rubbing your head, that kind of thing. It was great fun to do. And it was the third film I ever made with that wonderful actor, James Garner. He's not only a great actor, he's a great reactor. If you watch Victor Victoria, you'll know exactly what I mean. His reactions to my character were priceless, and it was easy to work with him by then because we were such good friends.
Well, I just find it hard to believe that you're a man.
Because you found me attractive as a woman.
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Doctor, I want you to make it stop. I'm in my hands. Something else could go any day now. I don't know when.
Somewhere in the midst of other films, a screenplay came across my desk, so to speak. It was loosely based on Jacqueline Dupre, who was a phenomenal cellist, but she got multiple sclerosis and couldn't eventually play. And that's the basis of the film. In this case, I played a violinist. It was one of the hardest films in terms of getting into the role that I've ever done. I've had to do longer films and more exhausting films, but this one was deeply sad, and I was confined to a wheelchair most of the time. I did a lot of research and went to the clinics where a lot of patients would go for counseling or to get together. They were very, very helpful to me, and it's such a terrible illness. Unfortunately, I think, if I may be so brave, I think the studio felt it wasn't the biggest and blockbuster they'd ever made, and they released it, of all days, on Christmas Day. And I think it closed on the day after Christmas Day, but I'm still very proud that I did it.
You married me because I was famous, and who are you? You're nothing but a lazy, spoiled man.
If I am, you made me that way.
Amelia, I'm so glad you could come.
Hi, you've got a great place.
Thank you. Well, let me look at you. You look so young.
Later in my career, I made 2 films, Princess Diaries 1 and Princess Diaries 2. And this lovely, young, talented actress starred in both of them, Anne Hathaway. It was clear from the very first day of shooting that she was going to be a star. She was incredibly talented. Her instincts were so true. She was very, very beautiful and just a lovely human being. And it was great fun to watch her growing and learning. And I kind of think that I probably was a bit of a mum to her too, and we're great friends.
I have an announcement to make. My granddaughter...
She's here. She's...
What? Mom, who is this sweaty guy? He's stinking up the house. I thought you were cooking cabbage.
He's my new guru. A lot of people ask me what it is like to do voice acting. Not to be seen on a film, but to just do a voice. I have to tell you, it's an extremely different technique. Nothing like making a movie. One goes into a studio and offers up every kind of reading of a line that you could possibly imagine. And finally, the director of the film takes the readings that he likes the best, and that's what ends up in his movie. You literally discover it as you go along, and you are sort of putty in the director's hands. The first one I did was when I was about 15 years old, and I think it was called The Singing Princess. And all I did was dub a Czechoslovakian animated movie. And I never thought about it until more recently, when a sort of spate of them have come along. I'm kind of happy to be doing them, like Bridgerton, like Gru's mum in Despicable Me and the Minions. It's very pleasant because you don't have to go into the studio. You can just come in your dressing gown if you want, but mostly you don't have to do hair and makeup. You just have to give a voice. In Despicable Me, the company said, you name her, what's she going to be called? And she's such a terrible woman and so full of herself. She thinks she's the best thing since God knows what. So I thought she would think of herself as a kind of Marlene Dietrich. That's her image of herself. She's far from that, but I thought she should be called Marlena, so she is. She's maybe the worst mother you could possibly encounter. She's terrible to Gru, her son. She's the reason he becomes such a despicable human being. It isn't poor Gru's fault, it's Mum's fault. Some marvelous surprise will come your way, some offer, some magic will happen, but be ready. Do your homework. That's usually the advice that I give, because when you're asked to do something as miraculous as some of the things that I've been asked to do, you'd better be ready. And I think to a certain extent I did a lot of homework, and it stood me in great good stead.